Consciousness as a Cybernetic System, Integrating Gregory Bateson's Systemic Insights. Abstract. The study of consciousness is increasingly moving beyond reductionist paradigms toward systemic, interdisciplinary models. This article explores how Gregory Bateson's cybernetic and systemic epistemology informs a more holistic understanding of consciousness. By integrating Bateson's concepts, such as the pattern which connects, mind-nature unity, recursive learning, and the role of aesthetics, this article argues for a non-reductionist, self-reflexive, and relational approach to consciousness. Bateson's interdisciplinary synthesis offers a robust foundation for reframing consciousness as an emergent, self-organizing process embedded within biological, cultural, and ecological systems. One introduction: rethinking consciousness systemically. Traditional models of consciousness have often relied on atomistic, linear, and mechanistic explanations. However, consciousness is increasingly understood as an emergent, dynamic, and self-referential process that cannot be fully explained through isolated neurological or computational approaches. Gregory Bateson's contributions to systems theory, cybernetics, and epistemology provide a framework for conceptualizing consciousness as an interconnected relational phenomenon. This article applies Bateson's principles to consciousness studies, proposing that consciousness is best understood as a cybernetic system governed by feedback loops, learning hierarchies, and systemic constraints. 2. Consciousness as a cybernetic and feedback-driven system. Bateson's engagement with cybernetics highlights the importance of feedback mechanisms in sustaining systems. If consciousness is a self-organizing system, it must involve recursive feedback loops, where self-awareness is continuously modified by internal and external stimuli. Distributed cognition, extending beyond the brain to include bodily, social, and ecological processes. Constraints and affordances, shaping conscious experience through interactions with the environment. Understanding consciousness in cybernetic terms allows us to see it as an adaptive system, dynamically balancing stability and change through self-correction and environmental responsiveness. 3. The epistemology of patterns, consciousness as relational knowledge. Bateson's concept of the pattern which connects suggests that knowledge is fundamentally relational. Rather than reducing consciousness to neural activity, we must examine the patterns and relationships that give rise to self-awareness. Applying this to consciousness studies, self-reflexivity emerges from systemic interrelations rather than isolated cognitive processes. Scope and category distinctions matter, as consciousness cannot be neatly separated from perception, cognition, and social influences. The self is an emergent pattern rather than a static entity, forming through continuous recursive engagement with the world. 4. Mind and nature, consciousness as a nested hierarchy. Bateson's rejection of the Cartesian split between mind and nature aligns with contemporary models that view consciousness as embedded within biological and ecological contexts. If mind and nature are unified, then consciousness is not localized solely in the brain but extends into social, linguistic, and environmental interactions. Self-awareness is co-constructed, emerging from relationships with both internal cognitive structures and external cultural frameworks. Recursive self-modification is a systemic property, allowing consciousness to evolve through iterative learning. 5. Recursive learning and the evolution of self-reflexivity. Bateson's levels of learning offer a valuable structure for understanding consciousness. Level 1. Learning basic adaptation in response to stimuli. Level 2. Learning metacognition, learning about learning, allowing for self-awareness. Level 3. Learning epistemological self-transformation, revising one's entire framework of understanding. Consciousness, viewed in this way, is not just an information processing system, but a self-modifying process, capable of reflexive adaptation at multiple levels. 6. The role of aesthetics, metaphor, and the sacred in consciousness. Bateson's work extends beyond logic and reason to emphasize the role of aesthetics, metaphor, and the sacred as epistemological tools. If consciousness is systemic, then linear reasoning is insufficient to grasp its full complexity. Metaphor and artistic cognition offer alternative ways of structuring conscious experience. Symbolic and affective processes are integral, meaning that emotions, rituals, and aesthetic experiences contribute to the formation of self-awareness. Non-reductionist approaches are necessary, as sacredness, understood systemically, prevents oversimplification of consciousness as mere computation or mechanistic function. 7. Consciousness as an interdisciplinary synthesis. Bateson's interdisciplinary methodology is critical for advancing consciousness studies. Consciousness must be approached as biological, emerging from evolutionary pressures and neural architecture; cybernetic, regulated by recursive feedback and self-organization; social, shaped by language, culture, and collective cognition; philosophical, embedded within epistemological and ontological concerns. By integrating these perspectives, consciousness can be framed as an ecological system rather than a singular function localized in the brain. 8. Conclusion. Towards a systemic non-reductionist model of consciousness. Bateson's insights challenge us to reframe consciousness as recursive, emerging through self-referential feedback mechanisms; relational, a product of patterned interconnections rather than isolated entities; non-reductionist, integrating aesthetics, affect, and metaphor into its structure; hierarchical, operating at multiple levels of learning and adaptation; interdisciplinary, requiring synthesis across neuroscience, cybernetics, and philosophy. As consciousness research evolves, Bateson's systemic approach provides a compelling framework for understanding the dynamic, emergent, and interconnected nature of mind and self. His work underscores the necessity of an epistemology that respects complexity, embraces relationality, and recognizes the limits of linear mechanistic models. Consciousness, like the ecosystems Bateson studied, is best understood as a living, evolving network of interactions rather than a static property of the brain.